The DA says it has taken its fight against the Employment Equity Act to court. In addition, the party says it will scrap the legislation once it governs through a coalition after next year's general elections. The DA marched to Parliament to highlight its objection to the act, which was signed by President Cyril Ramaphosa earlier this year. Matt Cuthbert from the DA, who is also the head of policy, now joins us via our Zoom link to discuss this a bit more further. Matt, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition. Of course, we have seen that you have taken this fight against the Employment Equity Act and you have taken to the streets of Cape Town and gone straight to Parliament. Why are you against this act?
So this is not only a pernicious piece of racial engineering, but it has very serious consequences for job losses in this country. We estimate that approximately 600,000 jobs would be lost if these regulations are put into force. And it discriminates against certain segments of society. And we as the DA, who believe in non-racialism and don't believe in this kind of crude racial engineering, have decided to oppose it. And not only did we have our members as well as members of the public out in the streets of Cape Town today, but we've also taken this particular matter to court so that the courts can decide whether or not this is in fact constitutional.
And Matt, you're saying that it's racial. What is racial about this act exactly, if you can explain to our viewers?
Sure. So it designates about 18 different sectors and industries where there are racial quota targets in place. And to give you an example, in certain provinces where you have targets for coloured and Indian South Africans, which are set at 0 and 0.1%, right? Which means if you employed people above that margin, they would fall foul of the law. And in a place like the Northern Cape, for example, if you employed too many black women, then you would also fall foul of the law. Now, it's also not on the employment equity side alone, but also the race water quotas that have been promulgated and gazetted by the Minister of Water and Sanitation, which basically dictate that if you have 25 to 75% of your water share, you then need to allocate that to what the government refers to as black individuals, or otherwise you will be denied access to water. Now, surely that's contrary to our constitution, which enshrines non-racialism, and it's not something that we can stand for as the official opposition.
And one would also say that the country has been on a transformation path, and this is done to also promote diversity and transformation. Are you against a transformation in this country?
So I think there's no problem with diversity at all. I think we need to recognize that everybody in this country is an individual, and we should not judge them on the basis of their skin color, their beliefs, or anything like that. We judge them on the content of their character. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we come from a very painful past of both colonialism and apartheid. But all we've seen over the past 29 years is trickle-down redress, where we assume by giving politically connected individuals shares in particular companies or placing them on boards, that somehow via osmosis, that benefit is going to trickle down to the unemployed masses. And if we look at the current unemployment rate and the expanded definition in particular, it's north of 40%. So it's safe to say that government's drive towards transformation has failed dismally, and it's actually not the cure for the problems that we face as a country, which are inequality, poverty, and unemployment.
And one would say that the Employment Equity Act continues to also focus on those who are disadvantaged here. And are you saying that this is actually not focusing on those who were previously disadvantaged, and some may say still disadvantaged?
Yes, I think that it incorrectly diagnoses the problem. And I think that it removes the agency of people of color. Who used to say that people need racial targets in order to be employed? People have skills, they have capabilities, and they are intelligent regardless of what the color of their skin is. And why do we need to reduce them to a racial quota? Moreover, I think the serious concern that we have is that if we had focused on the core issues like education, on making sure that we have a conducive environment for economic growth, then we'd find ourselves in a situation where we didn't have such a high unemployment rate. And if you see where we govern in the Western Cape, and the policies in which we have implemented and the result for employment with the lowest unemployment rate in the country, that is not by chance, that is by design, because we focus on making sure that we have a conducive environment for growth, that we look at absorbing people into the labor market and making sure, regardless of the color of your skin, we want you to live a life that's fulfilled and we want you to be able to climb the opportunity ladder.
And we now understand that you as the DA are actually taking this matter to court. What exactly will you be arguing in your court papers?
So a broad overview of what we'll be arguing is basically that this is in violation of the Constitution, the fact that we believe in non-racialism, which is defined in Chapter 1 and is linked to our Bill of Rights. And this goes entirely against what we believe in as a country. Often, I think the governing party in particular state that they are non-racial in their approach to governing, but we've seen that that is not in fact the case. And if we are truly to uphold the values of non-racialism, then we need to make sure that this piece of legislation is challenged and that it is declared unconstitutional.
One would also ask, Matt, that why now? I mean, this was put into legislation earlier this year. Why are you crying alarm now? Are you in a way campaigning for the elections and using this act as a tool, to campaign and get the numbers in for next year?
So as soon as these regulations were drafted and issued in May, we put out a statement, and we've been driving this issue ever since because it's something that we found close to our hearts and something that we think really needs to be addressed. So I don't think it's a matter of campaigning. I think the DA focuses on a number of issues in various portfolios, and this is one that has received particular prominence because of the pernicious effects it has. I think where electioneering has come into play is actually from the governing party side. If you look at the legislation and the regulations that are being spoken about in the run-up to the election, you look at things like the Bella Bill, you look at NHI, you look at expropriation without compensation, and now these employment equity amendments. And basically, the ANC has said to South Africans, we've got nothing else to campaign on besides race. And this is what we're going to use to try and hang as a carrot in front of voters, with the assumption that this will get people to vote for them and to put them back into office with a majority.
And if you don't win this matter at the courts, what's the next step? I hear you saying that, you will be campaigning next year should we find ourselves in a coalition to remove this from the law.
Well, I don't think that we can preempt what the judgment will be, and I think we should allow for the necessary time to pass and also for the relevant judge to consider the matter in front of them. But I wouldn't hesitate to say that we would obviously review the opinion that is given and then assess our options on how we would move forward from a legal point of view. However, from a political point of view, we'll continue to apply pressure on government and make sure that we make it unbearable for them to want to maintain these particular regulations. And this means in more rolling public protests, making sure that we're out in Parliament speaking about these issues and making sure that South Africans know exactly what the ANC is up to.
And during today's protest, I understand that you didn't hand over a memorandum of demands to those in Parliament. Why did you choose this route?
So the memorandum of demand wouldn't have necessarily been appropriate at this particular moment in time, because the number of our members of Parliament were there, and they're obviously members of Parliament who would have stated their opposition to this particular set of regulations. And I think it was more a symbolic gesture to understand that the laws that are coming out of Parliament by virtue of the ANC's parliamentary majority do not represent the broader view of South Africa. And this is why it wasn't just us alone as a party that went to go and march on Parliament today, but we had members of the community who came out in their masses to join us to register their dissent against this particular set of regulations.
Matt, thank you so much for your time here on the late edition. That is Matt Cuthbert from the DA. He is indeed the head of policy, talking about, that protest action which took place today in Parliament, and also what the DA plans on doing going forward to ensuring that indeed it does get scrapped.